Okay, live this Wednesday afternoon with David Hawkins of Abel Danger. Hello, David. How are you this afternoon?
I'm very well, Jason. Thank you for having me on your show.
Lovely to see you, as always. And of course, Novichok is back in the news. You have spoken
obey this
more.
order. He didn't care if he was the Secretary of Defense.
Wait a second.
America was.
Sorry, that was some audio bleeding through from another YouTube channel. I've doused that. David, no one has spoken about Novichok as much as you have, and I was just looking at it earlier today in the news. They're still, as recently as yesterday, pushing this story about the Novichok gas in liquid form.
My guest this evening is the accomplished author and historian.
We've got so many windows open here. I'm trying to make sure we don't get YouTube audio bleeding into our current effort. I apologize. It's been a very hectic morning here. There's quite a bit going on. But David, please share with us the information that you've got about this Novichok incident.
Well, I hadn't heard of Novichok until the incident in Salisbury in Wiltshire. It's a lovely little cathedral city. And so they bandy around this term, and you know the techniques that we've developed at Abel Danger. Whenever someone throws an interesting word across our bows, so to speak, we check to see if there's any patent that refers to it. So it turns out that Novichok is an extremely dangerous gas or liquid that if it's dropped on the skin and untreated, probably kill you in 5 or 8 minutes. It's 8 times more powerful, I believe, than VX gas, which was invented by the British. I believe it was invented actually at Porton Down, which is about a 15-minute drive from Salisbury. And one of the world's leading bioweapons and chemical weapons research labs is at Porton Down, run by the Ministry of Defence, or at least it would be nice if the Ministry of Defence or the British were able to persuade the public that it was run by government people. To my mind, it's been outsourced to private companies, specifically Serco and QinetiQ, but I'll come to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. So we got Novichok, and it turns out that I think you found an organization that had Novichok in its repertoire of patented systems.
Yeah.
But I found Northwestern University in Chicago, which I think is very interesting because Northwestern University was the hub, if you will, of the Students for a Democratic Society and the Weather Underground terrorist movement. And these clowns decided that in the interests of a global revolution, probably a Marxist, although I think it's more a psychopath revolution, they might need to kill 25 million Americans. And in order to kill 25 million Americans, you need to have access to what are known as weapons of mass destruction, or the acronym is CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive devices, which of course they have. So Novichok, had it been used on the Skripals, they'd be dead. And they're not.
But they've recovered it, of course. We've heard
exactly.
that
So
recently.
It's a bit like, you know, that deductive computing logic that I've been trying to encourage people to think about is, in the particular case of Kennedy's skull, if a 6 square inch fragment of his skull is blown out of the back of his head, the bullet didn't strike him from behind. If the weapon that killed Captain Charles DeConto as the duty officer of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center blew a hole in the inner Pentagon courtyard, 12 feet in diameter, with debris, probably 2 tons of debris, in the inside courtyard, then it wasn't a Boeing 757 hitting the building from the outside. So every time these characters try and pull off a false flag operation, what they suffer from, of course, is first of all, they don't have an A-team, and secondly, they're flouting or violating the laws of physics. And I would say the laws of physics are more powerful than the laws of the United States or the United Kingdom or Russia or whatever.
Or the laws of fake news, for that matter.
Well, of course, right? So this is the dressing, this is the theater, this is what appears in front of the curtain. And people like you and I and the Abel Danger team and anyone who cares to avoid suspending their critical imagination or disbelief needs to go behind the curtain and see who's pulling the strings, and whoever's pulling the strings, those strings obey the laws of physics. So back to Novichok.
Yes.
Right? So Novichok has to be held in stocks. And remember, it only takes a drop on your skin and you're dead in 10 minutes if you're not administering the antidote. So Northwestern University, the hub of the Students for a Democratic Society and the Weather Underground that had as an agenda the murder of 25 million Americans, that must have some Novichok stocks. So since Bernardine Dawn blew up the women's washroom, I don't know why these women have sort of a fetish about people, their basic biological functions. But of all the targets in the Pentagon, these clowns decided they wanted to blow up the women's washroom. What do you think that represents in terms of a strategic target? Over to you, Jason.
Well, I can't imagine that the women's washroom at the Pentagon was necessarily a strategic target, but of course, you and I have been speaking about this for a couple days. Our past several conversations have touched on Bernardine Dawn and her classes at Northwestern University on torture, and she seems to object to recent UN laws and rules and things against torture. But I want to bring you back, David, to this Salisbury spy attack. As recently as yesterday, The Telegraph, which is a well-respected publication in the UK, isn't it?
Yes, but again, one always has to dig behind the scenes and find out who are the custodians of the shares in The Telegraph. And there are a variety of ways of capturing the mind of an organization like The Telegraph, including threatening the directors or the editor with a Novichok attack.
Right. Well, and I think beyond that, there are, because some people find it difficult, I think, to accept when someone like you or I says that these news agencies are controlled. And it's not always necessarily as heavy-handed of a control as outright threats or even necessarily influence beyond, an example that I refer to frequently is that the Fox News personality, Tucker Carlson, expressed an interest in digging deeper in the Las Vegas shooting matter, but his investigation was cut pretty short, and I can only imagine that a highly paid individual like Tucker Carlson could easily be influenced when bosses tell him, don't do that. It's quite clear that his multi-million-dollar salary would be threatened by defying the wishes of whoever it is that's in charge of Fox News. So we could certainly see how someone like Jack Maidment, who works for The Telegraph, this is a guy who probably needs his job, and some editor there tells him that the Novichok nerve agent used in the Salisbury spy attack was delivered in liquid form, and furthermore, the British government has revealed that. Well, certainly that is how a top-down fake news campaign could begin. If the government releases an official statement that Sergei Skripal and his daughter were attacked with this nerve agent, certainly most people are going to agree with that, wouldn't you say, David?
Well, yeah, and then again, you have to dig behind the curtain, and there's another way other than the boss saying you're out of a job if you don't publish a story in the way I wanted, is remember there were, 87 million Facebook profiles stolen by an outfit called Cambridge Analytica. Mm-hmm. And you probably understand the technology better than I do. You can, with photoshopping, impute the accusation, or at least make it more credible, of being a pedophile, and therefore suddenly around these social engineering networks, you've got a totally innocent individual, including a reporter, being told, well, we need you to write the story with the following conclusion. Right. We need you to say that Novichok was administered in liquid form. But you see, this comes back to the violation of the laws of physics. If Novichok was administered in liquid form, the Skripals would be dead.
That stands to reason.
Yeah, so, end of story. So now, they're going to duck and weave, because if, as I believe, the active element that hit the Skripals was this BZ gas, And I've been seeing how smart I am to see if I can remember how to pronounce it. But I think I've given up on that. But it's some long chemical name, benzylate or something. But anyway, BZ gas is very interesting because it's described, or it was deduced as being a super effective or super powerful hallucinogenic drug.
That's
right?
interesting that it would be hallucinogenic, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And now, so I'm thinking, let's go back into the places where such a hallucinogenic drug might be administered to put together a SWAT team to go to Salisbury and stage an attack on the Skripals that might be interpreted by the BBC scriptwriters as a Novichok attack. And lo and behold, we arrive at Field Sister Christine Marcy, who developed a prisoner services medical program while she was senior counsel for the United States Marshal Service. So I say to myself, well, since this woman is an evil psychopathic bitch, right? Sue me if you like. Okay, that's just for starters. But I think Field would make some comment, now you're being nasty to evil psychopathic bitches, right? And I'm not. You know, I'm a very polite old British gentleman. But anyway, let Christine Marcy crawl out of the woodwork, if she will. And remember, she has spawned a Mendenhall's baby. I don't know if you want to mention that in the context of a woman who might be administering BZ gas to the prisoners moving around the country in the United States.
Well, I mean, again, that's certainly something that we have touched on in our previous conversations, and I would urge people to go back and look at those. This all ties in, for me, David, with things that you've been discussing and things that you've brought to my attention, like this social media security software from QinetiQ North America. You know, these things are all about controlling people's opinions, controlling the flow of information. Obviously, there's a well-established method for doing that in traditional news outlets like the Telegraph. Obviously, we know that if this is controlled by a wealthy billionaire or some rich person that owns the Telegraph and pays these people, we've got a very easily understood and tightly controlled system of making sure only the message that they want goes out. And the same is true of NBC News and CNN and Fox and the New York Times and whoever it might be. But of course, when it comes to social media, what we've hit upon is a new method of sharing ideas. And of course, David, you're in British Columbia right now, another country, and without Skype and YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and the various social media tools that we're utilizing right now, 5, 10, 15 years ago, it would have been tremendously difficult and incredibly costly and complicated for me to arrange a video conference where I could share your vast knowledge of technology and patents and the way these sort of systems works. It would have been a huge barrier to entry for me to have a news program that I could share with thousands and thousands of people. So of course, QinetiQ North America and others would potentially have a desire and a need to develop some method for controlling the flow of information over social media. And of course, you've described how they can have a patent that they say is intended to locate threats. However, who determines what a threat is remaining kind of vague. If they feel that you and I sharing true information about the source of a particular chemical attack is a threat to their story, then they could deem it illegal. Now, you also just brought up Cambridge Analytica, and I found this interesting article in the very corporate-controlled and advertiser-driven New York Times, which is talking about, I haven't read this yet, but they're taking us inside Cambridge Analytica's virtual currency plans. And this is an article by Nathaniel Popper and Nicholas Confessore. This is also from yesterday, and this is very interesting because, David, I don't know if I've made you fully aware of my investigation into a social media network that is based on blockchain technology and has got a cryptocurrency linked to it. And of course, that is the social media network known as Steemit, which evidence and information that I've been exploring seem to indicate that this is a controlled network that in some way seems to allow the benefactors to financially benefit and also allows them to control the flow of information in that social media network. So perhaps our viewers will dive into this article and figure out what Cambridge Analytica plans to do with our data relative to virtual currency plans. Can you elaborate on this? Do you know anything about this?
Well, I, as a layperson, I can pass an opinion, but I just want to comment on the physiognomy of that lad in Cambridge Analytica, because to me he's the perfect British nerd. I mean, look at, is he not?
I agree.
I mean, so, you know, I risked being a nerd at one time, but then I decided I need to be exciting or more excited, so I started, you know, consorting with people like Field McConnell, right, who's as crazy as a wheel in the most wonderful way I can possibly imagine, but he's got a mind like a razor. And I would love to see in a court of law Field McConnell against this Cambridge Analytica guy, talking about dogfighting and the perceptions of aerial combat simulation as seen by the average American after the 9/11 attack. It would be it'd be quite an extraordinary debate. But anyway, moving on, cryptocurrency. Yeah, I often say to people, well, you're talking about this virtual currency stuff, and I don't really understand any of it, right? But I say, hypothetically, you think the virtual currency bank, wherever that might be, owes you some money and might be fraudulent. How do you cash in your chips if they remove your password, right? I mean, you know, I've got a certain amount of money in my pocket, and I've got some credit cards. I feel fairly safe, even if they unplug the internet. I can motor around for a while with some currency that I can buy some gas with and some basic food. But if my credit card, you know, when I went in said, you know, rejected, etc., what the hell do I do? So I think this movement, it's an incredible power play by forces that we really don't understand. And I don't think we should trade in any currency that at least 20 or 30% I can go up to a stallholder who might sell me a loaf of bread and said, here's $5, I want some bread to eat. Anyway, that's a layperson's reaction to this kind of hyper-sophisticated virtual stuff. Incidentally, talking about virtual stuff, what the web is now populated with is virtual identities, right?
Yes.
So people like Douglas and the guys that are suing you for $1 million, well,
18 million.
yeah. You say, well, come to my office and let's go and have a coffee, and you can tell me where the hell do you think I can get $80 million to pay you, and let's break this down and see whether or not I shouldn't be suing you for libel. I mean, these are gutless creeps, these individuals who hide behind virtual identities. You're Jason Goodman. I'm David Hawkins. Field McConnell is Field McConnell. We can have a drink with you, or we can, in the limit, beat you to death.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right, David. And just to elaborate on this photograph here, this guy is Alexander Nix, which is a curious last name.
A great name, isn't it? Means nothing.
Yeah. And he oversaw Cambridge Analytica's effort to develop its own virtual currency when he was the company's chief executive. So this is very interesting. This is a company that has incredible access to information about people from Facebook, which is essentially an incredibly sophisticated diary of what you do, where you go, who you're associated with. I'm sure they could extrapolate over time if you're wearing new clothing, what type of brands you're interested in, what you're liking.
Who your hairdresser is. I mean, I wouldn't trust a guy with a haircut like that.
Well, it's interesting to know that they're involved in creating virtual currency. There's all these plays towards cryptocurrency, and I'm very intrigued by the technology. I think it has, like any technology, I think it has pros and cons. I think it's got benefits, but it also has dangers. And anytime I'm sold really hard on something and the people selling it can't answer questions about it, like in the case of Steemit, when I asked where the money came from to pay people, I didn't get a very good answer. And you spoke about virtual identities and going to meet people at their offices. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the video where I actually went to the New York office that Steemit.com's main website is registered to. There is no office there, David. It is a virtual office, very curiously.
Just like 911 used virtual war rooms.
Did it?
Well, of course. I mean, where was the physical? You see, the physical war room of the United States government for the war games of 911, do you know where that was?
Was it in Building 7?
No, it was the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. That was where they were practicing in the communications with the blue team to defend America against an attack. That's where Captain Gerald DeConto was the duty officer.
Right.
That was where the building was hit by a bunker buster bomb that went right through to the inner courtyard, leaving a hole in the inner courtyard of 14 feet diameter, which doesn't accord in the laws of physics with the Boeing 757, which allegedly hit the outside of the building.
I'm so intrigued by this, David, because I agree with you that it doesn't seem, I've seen so much evidence that leads me to believe that there is no way that a 737 or a 757 or a passenger jet like that could have done that type of damage to the Pentagon. I've heard aviators, I think including Field, say that a jet just simply couldn't fly that low to the ground, that the aerodynamic forces around the jet and the ground would cause it to just crash before it ever got there. But at the same time, then I hear testimony from retired FBI agent Robin Gritz, who I've come to trust, to tell me that she was there and she saw the airplane parts that had serial numbers on them and everything like that. It's often difficult for me to reconcile these sort of opposing points of view. What would you say about that?
Well, we got to come back to Field's sister, Christine Marcy. So
right.
In December of 1988, she calls her brother and she says, I got a problem, Field. I'm supposed to be moving prisoners from Hawaii to the mainland, and the airlines don't like them shackled to the seats for safety reasons. So we're thinking, and I'm paraphrasing what I think she said, or let's say what she meant, we're thinking of having our own airline in the Department of Justice, working with the Marshal Service, of which she was senior counsel. Mm-hmm. But how do I handle a situation if we get a mutiny of prisoners? So he said, well, we drone the planes, you stupid woman, right? And she should have known, because he, as a kid, you know, with his father, they had model airplanes, and for all I know, Field was flying radio-controlled, you know, those model planes. Great fun. I did a bit as a kid.
Right.
And she should have known that. But because she's got severe penis envy, they probably didn't let her play with the model planes. So he tells her what she should have already known. Now, this woman, again, some people don't understand why we keep harping on about how dangerous this woman is. Right. In 1988, when she put the phone call to her brother, that was 4 years after she created the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund. Now, this isn't virtual funding. This is where I confiscate your Lamborghini because I think you're a New York mafia hood and I don't think you've earned it with, you know, in a legal way. And you have to sue me or sue the government to get your Lamborghini back. Well, if you're a hood in New York, you're not going to do that. You're going to say, all right, well, here's the Lamborghini. I'll go and buy another couple because I'm making $5 million shaking down Donald Trump, right? I mean, isn't that the way the mob works? I mean,
Exactly.
when Donald Trump builds his hotels and casinos, he has to do it with the cooperation of the unions and the mob,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So I don't cast aspersions on Donald Trump. All I'm saying is those lifestyles make you exceedingly vulnerable to entrapment and blackmail. Anyway, moving on. So in
before we get off of that, David, because I don't want to, you know, there are people that approach me who are obviously trying to waste my time and fill me up with nonsense and things like that. But I also want to balance that with having everyone feel like we are giving fair attention to alternate opinions, questions, you know, not just blindly following a conclusion. And of course, we recently addressed some of the concerns of a gentleman in Warsaw, Poland named Kevin. And he's been very persistent in saying that he is finding information that conflicts with some of these assertions that Christine Marcy began the agencies and had the roles in the agencies that you're telling us that she did. And I'm not trying to question you, but I want to help bolster the things that you're saying with hard evidence. How can we find documentation, or is there documentation to back up some of these claims as far as the creation of the civil asset forfeiture and all that sort of stuff?
Well, look at her bio. I mean, you
Where do we
know,
get that?
so her bio says that, well, Christine Marcy bio, and you put in a few keywords like prisoner medicals program and so on, and you should be able to pull that up. And that's what she is. That's what she did. She worked for 10 different government agencies, primarily centered around the Department of Justice.
And then the issue that Kevin
responsible.
had, sorry to interrupt you there, the issue that Kevin had was that he felt that most of the information being returned was coming from Reddit and Abel Danger and sources that could have been placed there by people other than these government agencies themselves. So I'm just trying to see if we can satisfy some of Kevin's challenges to this by finding sources that he might consider closer to the government agency. Is there anything that we should be searching for along those lines?
Well, I think if you look up ICE, she's a trustee or a director of the ICE Foundation, ICE Foundation, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement. And I think they give a bit of a bio there. There's a whole range of government departments where she's referenced.
Yes.
And of course, one of the most important reference for me is her role in that disquisition, if that's the right word, by Judy Mann about a woman who can be a professional and a mother.
Right.
Yeah,
and that was an interesting article that Kevin seemed to miss. So this is definitely the icefoundation.org webpage. And actually, there was something quite interesting I noticed here, because when I was speaking with Kevin, I told him that I felt that Christine Marcy was making a deliberate effort to suppress information about herself from being available on the internet. And there was one of these websites showed us the fellows, who we are. This might be it. And she was conspicuously missing. The photograph of her was conspicuously missing, even though she had been a fellow since 1996. Now here we see on the board of directors Christine Marcy of the ICE Foundation. So this is not a website that Abel Danger controls, correct? This is a U.S. immigration.
It's written by the ICE Foundation. So these represent 45,000 retired or current people working in immigration, customs, and enforcement around the world. She's a trustee. Now, if she decided that she wanted to keep Field's wife out of the country, she can just pick up the phone and say, look, my brother's giving me a hard time. Keep the woman out, right? Now, if you look through the record, I mean, she's an entirely respectable woman, Denise McConnell. She's been trying to get into the country for months, and I've been telling Field, and I think he secretly believes me but doesn't perhaps want to believe me, that his sisters probably told the people in the Immigration and Customs Enforcement to keep her out of the country, right? Now, she knows very well that Field's resources are limited in terms of the kind of influence, and certainly the money she can bring to bear on taking anyone out. Remember, she's got a captive group of prisoners. Effectively, she and Jamie Gorelick, I think I prefer to pronounce her name Gorlick, seems to summarize her behavior a little more effectively, and Janet Reno. In the 1990s, they took the jail population, the incarcerated population, up from, I think, 500,000 to 1 million. And she's got a medical services program. I don't know if it says that in the bio. So she can administer this BZ super hallucinogenic drug to an arbitrary number of prisoners, turning them some into aggressive zombies and some into a stupor, get them in a Conair plane, fly them to a crime scene, take out anyone in the world, if you will, or intimidate them, and put them back in jail with a perfect alibi. So I don't know how much time you want to spend on Kevin, but I think he's a loser.
I don't want to spend that much time on Kevin, but I do want people to feel like we're giving fair shake to questions that arise, because I don't want to be accused of just being drawn into a narrative. I have felt throughout this process that you've provided very good evidence to support what you're saying. I've got another page right here, David, that's coming from the, this is the napwash.org.
Napa Wash, I think.
Yeah, the National Academy of Public, Napa Wash, exactly. The National Academy of Public Administration, which has a listing for Christine Marcy. I do believe this is where I saw her listed as a fellow since 1996. This is talking about her, she was a former president and chief executive officer of the National Academy of Public Administration. She's a consultant with McConnell International, chief operating officer, Small Business Administration, senior counsel, detention and deportation. That seems like someone who would have the ability to keep someone from entering the United States. Immigration and Naturalization Service. She's the former positions with the U.S. Department of Justice, Assistant Director for Prisoner Services, U.S. Marshal Service, Associate Deputy Attorney General. And again, when you tie this together with testimony from her own brother, of course, who's Field McConnell, I don't understand why any person would necessarily have a need to malign their own sister unless, like Field does, he honestly believed that she was a danger to the people of the United States and doing evil. So it's not so much that I want to address Kevin, but I want to make sure that anytime something that I say or something that you say is questioned, that we back it up with solid information so that people don't feel like we are doing anything other than our best to solve these mysteries and investigate these situations. So the B...
Can I just jump in
yes,
there,
please.
Jason?
Please do.
Let's, all right, let's take Christine Marcy. Let's expose this woman a little more. If you can Google Christine Marcy and accelerated loan guarantee fund or arrangement made when she was the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration in January of 2001, 10 months before the attack on the United States.
So
and let me tell you, go ahead.
I've got Christine Marcy Accelerated Loan Guarantee Fund.
Have you found anything there?
Well, I've found Abel Danger links. Perhaps that is what you wanted me to show.
Yeah, but there's a separate article that we borrowed from that text, not written by Abel Danger, but where she's being interviewed, as I understand it, on her role as Chief Operating Officer of the Small Business Administration. And let me just emphasize to Americans the importance of that. The Small Business Administration is the largest supplier of venture capital to small businesses in the United States, with a loan portfolio of about $70 billion. That's a huge amount of money for a woman who's never run a whelk stall. I don't know if you have whelk stalls in the United States, but in England, at the seaside resorts, you have little stalls where people are selling shellfish and that sort of thing. So in terms of management challenge, it's not a big problem to sell some shrimps to people who have gone to the beach for a holiday. And I'm being very derogatory, but I feel I want to be derogatory about this woman because she's sheltered behind this pervasive bureaucracy, which represents an existential threat to the United States of America. So it's time she came out into the woodwork. She can sue her brother. She can sue me if she thinks we're being nice to her. But I want to just talk about this accelerated loan guarantee program. So now, if you, and excuse me because no doubt someone will come into this show and hear me out of context, but sometimes tongue-in-cheek, I say, well, how do you go to the Small Business Administration or the preferred lenders and get a loan if your credit is lousy? Well, the way to do it is to find a black one-legged lesbian, right, that fits all of the categories of disadvantaged society, and knock on the door of a bureaucrat at the Small Business Administration and say, I want $500,000 to participate in the exercise with Boeing where we're simulating an attack on the Pentagon, right? And amazingly enough, and this is Bill Clinton, you're not allowed to redline an application, that is to say, refuse a loan to a company based on, or an individual based on sexual orientation, race, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if you're a two-legged heterosexual white man and you go for get for a loan, they're going to blow you away, right? So joking apart, $70 billion of loan capital is extended to people, many of whom are absolutely worthy, right, in getting a loan and avoiding the very high interest rates going through the conventional market. But ordinarily, many of them would never get a loan in the first place, but the banks aren't allowed to refuse it. So what the banks have said to Christine Marcy, when she was the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration, we will lend to these people that in the normal course of events we wouldn't lend to, but we need a guarantee that if they default, and between you and me, you know that most of these people don't have the backup to actually deliver on the project that they've been brought up on. So a whole guarantor community is in place to guarantee the banks that their loans will be paid in the event of a default. Now, what Christine Marcy did, and it's mind-blowing, 10 months before the 9/11 attack, she said, the banks have been onto us. Remember, she's the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration.
Yes.
The banks have been onto us to accelerate the loan guarantee. So when the bank says, can we lend money to this, and I'm being facetious, and I'm repeating, but that's my British sense of humor, to this black one-legged lesbian who can be a perfectly nice individual, right? But we don't think that she's going to be able to pay back the money. So we need a guarantee that if she defaults, right, that we get the money in lieu. And what Christine Marcy said in this article, and I'm sure we'll be able to find it eventually, she said the banks were complaining that it took too long to get the guarantee in place. Right. So do you know what her goal was in January of 2001? She brought the guarantee period or approval down to a certain number of a certain time. Do you know what that time was?
I don't.
60 minutes.
Ooh.
I mean, how absurd is this? You've got someone coming in, let's say, asking for a loan of $500,000 so they can participate with Boeing in a war game exercise of 9/11, and the bank turns around and says, we have to lend this money to this person because otherwise they're going to sue us for being denying loans based on our sexual orientation. Can you bring it down to 60 minutes? And this dumb woman, this Christine Marcy, this Chris Field's sister, brought it down to 60 minutes. And then it's guaranteed by a guarantor. And then the taxpayer comes in if the guarantor objects that there's a liquidation process. Now, when you lend money to someone under this arrangement, you have the right to liquidate them. So on 9/11, what I'm claiming, Jason, is a whole bunch of little companies were liquidated. And liquidation is an interesting term, particularly when you're talking to the mob. It can mean your house, your business, or you as an individual.
Indeed.
So a lot of things got liquidated on 9/11 as a result of Christine Marcy's Small Business Administration program.
Now,
and I would say, go ahead.
Let me back up some of the things that you've said there, because I believe you and I am fascinated by this. So let's help build the case here. We've got, this is interesting and I hadn't seen it before. This is LinkedIn and this is a page for Chris Marcy. Now, I suppose someone trying to fool us could have created this, but I don't think so. It does say that she's a member of the board of directors of the National Academy of Public Administration.
That's the one, yeah. Sometimes she goes to Chris, you know,
right.
more masculine name.
Right, and we've confirmed that with the National Academy of Public Administration webpage. It says that she's a member of the Board of Advisors for the Global Smile Fund, a member of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Foundation, which we've also confirmed there on their website. Her previous experience does include the McConnell International and MI, which I guess is McConnell International, Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Small Business Administration from 1999 until September 2001. Now, I also found this article here, David, on GCN. Now, I don't know very much about GCN, but according to their own website, GCN delivers technology assessments, recommendations, and case studies to support public sector IT managers who are responsible for the specification, evaluation, and selection of technology solutions. And GCN accomplishes this by answering the questions that public sector IT professionals need to know. So people can dig into what GCN is, but it's located in McLean, Virginia, and it seems to be, it seems to be a very legitimate website. It offers its address, and it has a place where you can advertise on there and everything. And in January of 2001, they did run this article on loan improvement, which talks about a 5-year plan for overhauling its information technology systems. The Small Business Administration recently acquired new software for financial and other administrative tasks. And it goes on to talk about the first phase of the modernization, in which the agency has upgraded the systems for managing its extensive portfolio of guaranteed loans, and it refers to the Chief Operating Officer, Christine Marcy. So I think this is the article that you're talking about. This also very curiously talks about how the Small Business Administration is, it says, in the second phase of the modernization, the Small Business Administration is revamping its financial, human resources, procurement, and travel system with a web-enabled Oracle Corp applications. Now, I just heard for the first time yesterday that Oracle, which of course is owned by billionaire Larry Ellison, that is taking over the cloud data services contract that was previously controlled by Amazon. And it's interesting also that it uses a program called Federal Financials 3.3. I always am very curious when I see that combination of numbers arrive. I feel like sometimes it's used to indicate something to those that are looking for it, but I can't say if it means anything or if it's just the third revision of their software with 3 maintenance updates. That's certainly possible. So is this the article you were talking about, David?
Not quite. I'll find it later, but it is not in dispute that she proudly launched the Accelerated Loan Guarantee Program for the Small Business Administration with the objective of bringing the approval for the loan guarantee to below 60 minutes. And this was in January of 2001, and that gave her a vehicle for the obligatory or compulsory liquidation of small businesses if they violated their loan contract. So on 911, all they had to do in real time, like less than 60 minutes, as an aircraft took off, they could decide that the small business that was responsible for working with the defenses, the mentored defenses of the United States of America, were violating their loan protocols because they looked as though they were about to fail to protect America against the attack. So they were liquidated, right, by flying whatever it was, probably a bunker buster bomb, into the Pentagon, where there was a small company working, and I think this will interest you, called Base One Technologies. Right? Base One Technologies is a preferred supplier to the Pentagon renovation project. It was formed in 1994. I think it was the 14th of March or February of 1994, as an 8A, a woman-owned 8A company, which was a protege of Serco.
Wow.
Just
what do you
up
mean
the road.
by that?
Well, under the Mentor Protege program of the Small Business Administration, developed or refined by Christine Marcy and John Kerry, a mentor company like Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or Raytheon was obliged under the Small Business Administration laws to offset any substantial contract with the United States government to an array of 8A companies, and I'm coming back being facetious, to, let's say, black one-legged lesbian-owned companies, right? And the point is, those little companies are now extraordinarily vulnerable because they've gone to the bank to borrow the money so they can fulfill their obligations as a protege of Boeing. But maybe the interests of that small company are different from the interests of the Boeing directors. For example, if you look at a range of countries whereby an owner can come from or have an ethnic origin in that can accept a small business loan, it includes Pakistan, India, Vietnam, China, Korea, Japan, etc. So you've got ethnic groups that get special dispensation from a normal loan procedure where they have to go to a bank and prove they're competent because of people like Christine Marcy who can accelerate the loan, right? However, then the little borrowing company is now vulnerable right in the middle of a war game to being liquidated because she deems them to have violated the loan application.
You know,
so you can see you've actually, go ahead.
Sorry, one interesting thing I see here on the Base One Technologies website, I don't know if you can see it there on the screen share through Skype, but right on their homepage, look at what they've got, David.
Hold on, let me just expand this.
It's the World Trade Center in its
There you go, you see.
2011 form.
So this is a woman-owned company that had access to the most important defense secrets of the United States in its contract on the Pentagon renovation project, right? There was a huge project launched in the early 90s, with Bill Clinton, where billions of dollars were spent on mentor companies, including the British company AMEC, that was doing the restoration or the renovation of the Pentagon for that program. And guess who got the contract for taking all away the evidence? AMEC. So it was a clear, unadulterated scam by British intelligence to knock out the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center through these array of small business 8A companies directly controlled by Field System.
Now, there's another individual named William Campbell. Are you familiar with him?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. So this was someone, and again, I'm not trying to, I just want to make sure people feel like we are fairly addressing questions rather than ignoring them. William Campbell, let me see here. He was apparently involved with the civil service, something to do with the SES. And again, I don't find it remotely far-fetched to presume that someone like Christine Marcy would go to great lengths to hide her activities. Yeah, I'm trying to find these links here that will take us to Mr. Campbell. But what was is the civil service something or other that was, do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Civil Service
sorry.
Act of 1979, perhaps?
Oh, yeah, that was the Foundation Act, I think, for launching the Small Business Administration. No, sorry, the SES.
Right. So what does he have to do with that?
I don't have a clue. Was he supposed to be the founder?
Well, according to people who have been, stoked to asking questions based on, Kevin's line of inquiry.
Okay, well, let me just explain there. If you're going to create an entity like the Senior Executive Service, you're going to need informed people to help you. So Christine Marcy was not the founder, but she was a charter member. I think there were 7 charter members. I don't know the names of those individuals, but she was one of them. So when the legislated or the appointed founder to put the whole thing together was in place, he or she would have sat down with the charter members and said, hey, what are we going to do here? How can we create a bureaucracy that can ultimately one day be in a position to overthrow the government of the United States? For all I know, I mean, I wasn't a fly on the wall.
Right.
But certainly the effect of the Senior Executive Service has to create a bureaucratic logjam that was unable to respond effectively to a simulated war game exercise going rogue on the morning of 9/11. And you guys, Americans, my friends, you nearly lost your country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've found the webpage here. This is the presidency.ucsb.edu, and it's talking about the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, and it's a statement on the signing of that into law from October 13th, 1978, and it's saying that history will regard the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 as one of the most important laws enacted by this Congress. Congress has done an extraordinary job of shaping this landmark legislation and enacting it in just 7 months. It does go on to talk about how this law establishes a senior executive service and bases the pay of executives and senior managers on the quality of their performance, and it provides a more sensible method of evaluating individual performance according to this.
Well, if I could just jump in there, you see, when QinetiQ talks about developing or patenting a social engineering protection appliance to monitor for criminal and malicious activities on an intranet, let's say.
Yes.
Well, what happens if they decide that what is malicious and criminal is what you say,
Correct.
right? Or I say, or Phil McConnell says, that might conflict with the goals of Christine Marcy, ultimately to have a dominant bureaucracy run by, what, traitors?
Right. Well, and we've also seen how they've been able to use regular media as well as social media to continually press what you and I have determined to be fake news about this Novichok gas attack in Salisbury, which as recently as yesterday, mainstream media outlets such as the Telegraph in the UK continue to tell us that the Novichok nerve agent was delivered in liquid form. And you've told us that it is so deadly that even a small amount would certainly have killed Mr. Skripal and his daughter, and that didn't happen.
No, it's a bit like saying these guys who could barely fly a Cessna could hop into a Boeing 757 and fly at 500 miles an hour at 15 feet elevation and take out the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. It didn't happen.
But It's got a similar goal, doesn't it? To perpetuate a war in the Middle East. This obviously...
Against a virtual force field, if you will, which they use, and I say again and again, don't treat these people as terrorists. Treat them as criminals. That is to say, I would argue that Christine Marcy is a criminal. Not a terrorist.
And of course, the goal is to convince Mr. Trump, as I've depicted in the graphic for our show today, that he should be bombing Syria and going to war with Syria and creating a war with Russia, right? I mean, that would be the goal.
Well, and that comes back. I've just popped an email text into your Skype there related to Christine Marcy, and I didn't write this. This is it. So there you have, while at the United States Marshal Service, she developed a prisoner medical service program, right? So that means she found some way of treating prisoners according to her agenda for how they should be treated. So if she wanted to create zombies or aggressive robots that could be flown from one jail to another via a crime scene, like the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, she's got the perfect vehicle to create a structure that can then be presented through BBC scriptwriters as an attack by some crazed right-wing, gun-happy guy like Timothy McVeigh. But then you follow up a little carefully and you find out that she flies evidence from the Murrah building of the bombs placed inside, including underneath the child care center, the daycare center. I mean, how appalling is that? Yeah. Right? Any explosive expert looking at the profile of the Murrah building can see there were some bombs inside the building. Right? She flies the evidence down to the tainted lab by the FBI. Now, Robert Mueller and James Comey should be horsewhipped and driven out of town because they've allowed the FBI lab to be compromised. The lab was, for a while, as far as I understand, run or directed or manipulated by a guy called Robert Hansen, probably one of the most dangerous spies in America's history.
And you've
So
spoken about him before.
Yeah. So now, and then she takes Timothy McVeigh and pops him into Supermax, the ADX jail, right? Timothy McVeigh is sandwiched between Ramzi Youssef, who designed the bomb for the World Trade Center attack of 1993, right? Where Trump did a tour of that building just after in 1993 with, I believe, either the architect or a principal engineer for the World Trade Center. And
Yes.
there's a video where he says, I was amazed because there were entire columns blown away.
Right.
And his comments on that video, it's quite compelling. He said this was an incredibly strong building.
Yep.
So he says there's no way, or at least I do not believe, that the collapse of Towers 1 and 2 on 9/11 was just due to planes. There had to be explosives inside the building. And Abel Danger has explained where those explosives were placed and very probably how they were placed. They were placed in the insulation of the elevator shafts.
Right. And of course, Marvin Bush was the CEO of the company Securicom. My associate, Charles Ortel, has dealt personally with Marvin Bush and does not have very good things to say about him. I'm showing just the video only, not the audio, of Donald Trump at Ground Zero right after the terror attacks of 9/11. This is an interview that took place 12 days, I think, after the terror attacks, where we see a significantly younger Donald Trump speaking to an interviewer here. I am familiar with this interview that you're talking about, and it is quite interesting that Trump was convinced there were bombs. Trump has obviously been, for a long time, talking about some alternative views of things that what I believe you and I and Mr. Trump consider to be fake news. I think I'm more in line with his way of thinking. Of course, we've spoken many times about this article from 1979 in the Washington Post by Judy Mann, where the very first thing out of the gate is a typo of Christine Marcy's name as Christine Mary. Now, something really interesting came up the other day, David, and one of the things that I love about Crowdsource the Truth is that we're talking to so many different people about so many different topics. This idea of a deliberate typo being, again, sort of a clue of some kind to let someone know that if they're expecting something to happen, you'll know that it happened if there's a typo in the article. I personally consider the Washington Post a piece of trash, but they do have a lot of professional editors working there, and I think making a typo about the primary subject of the article seems like something to me that would be kind of unlikely to occur. And that's the article, of course, with the Mendenhall's baby reference.
Well, that wasn't a typo. I mean, you know, that's two words that I've never seen juxtaposed before. Mendenhall's baby, as you know.
But Christine Mary, calling her Christine Mary.
Yes, and of course, that comes back to the point about how you can get in there and you can change words. But I think it's possible it was a typo, but certainly Mendenhall's baby is not a typo. Now, Let me just go back to the behavior and comportment, and every crime scene investigator should be looking at the key players. So let's say we look at Donald Trump's behavior in that interview where he makes these statements there had to be explosives inside the building.
Yes.
Now, if he believes that, you would expect when he gets to be president, one of the first things he should do is open up an inquiry into what kind of explosives were used. Right, to bring those buildings, if that's what he believes. That's actually his duty, in my opinion. Now, let's say on 911, there was communications going around through the, the Boeing asymmetric encrypted routing system that was not available to the people defending the United States on 911, but was being communicated to people who needed to be threatened, intimidated, extorted, or blackmailed into standing down defenses of the United States on 911 to allow a coup d'etat or a putsch or an insurrectionist to proceed. So if I'm the organizer behind the attack, I might get a message to Donald Trump hey Donald, how would you like our target to be the Trump Tower on 911? Well, what's Donald Trump going to do? He's going, oh my God, you can't do that. Probably disbelief. He'd start with disbelief until he started seeing the buildings being hit and collapsing. And let's say that fifth plane was pointing at Trump Tower, and he's got his family and his business and everything else. So this is the problem that we face when a crime of that magnitude is not solved immediately, right? It emboldens and empowers the criminals who are responsible for the attack, not terrorists. There isn't one terrorist amongst them. They use terror as a weapon or an instrument. James E. Files, as I understand it, when he wanted to get information out of someone, he'd put the head in a vice and crank up the vice until this poor guy's eye popped out. Because initially the guy said, I'm not going to tell you anything. But once you got one eye popped out, you probably figure you got nothing to lose, or you're going to have the second eye popping out, right? So this guy is a brutal killer. He sounds quite plausible. I'd love you to get to an interview with him. I'd love to interview the guy myself.
We're
Be
working
riveting,
on it
wouldn't
for sure.
Yeah.
We're working on it for sure. He's writing a book, and he said he would revisit the possibility of an interview after he's done with that. David, we need to wrap it up, but I just wanted to bring it all back because what you're saying about the use of terror brings me back to this QinetiQ North America social media security software, because there's cyber terror being used. You know, blowing up buildings is one thing, but certainly threatening people with the destruction of their reputation or charging them with federal crimes that could land them in jail and ruin their life and maybe end their life in jail. Well, that's another form of terror. Menacing.
Actually, let me just jump in there.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Justin. It's RICO. It's racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization using blackmail and intimidation. And QinetiQ joined at the hip with Serco. And the reason why it's joined at the hip, at Porton Down in 2001, Serco broke off as the facilities manager of the bioweapons and chemical weapons research establishment. And QinetiQ went on to cyberspace activities, but those two British organizations are basically running a criminal enterprise.
It's stunning information, David, and I'm so pleased that you and I are speaking regularly and doing these broadcasts, sharing all this, because you put things together in a way that just no one else does. And I'm really pleased we were able to do this today. We'll be doing it more frequently, as you suggested. Thank you for joining me. Is there anything else you wanted to share with everyone before we go?
No, there's a lot that's going to follow this, and I think, yes, I'm very happy that you and I can talk on a regular basis. I think Field is happy. He can take a break because he's been so committed, and he's lost a lot of his, how shall I put it, flair and energy, because when you're fighting these monsters, you know, these giant bureaucracies and so on. I had a phrase when I worked in Paris and Schlumberger going to engineering, it's like kicking jelly, right? You know, there's a big wobble, and then basically their greatest defense is to carry on and ignore you.
Right.
They're not going to ignore us.
Well, I'm pleased to hear you say that. And of course, people can see more about David and read his writing and his daily reports, his intelligence reports that are being sent to General Kelly at abeldanger.org, danger.org. You can support their work on Patreon. You can follow their radio broadcasts, their video shows, links to the videos that David and I do, that Field and I do. It's a wonderful resource. They've got videos on BitChute. They've got videos on YouTube. Abel Danger is a worldwide cloud-centric investigative network. And David, of course, is one of the principals. I'm fascinated by his genius and his approach to all of these things. Crowdsource the Truth, of course, is also a community-sponsored resource. I hope that people who enjoy the program will go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become monthly sponsors. David, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to wrap it up now, and I'll be back in just a little while with Charles Ortel.
Thank you, Jason. Bye now.
Have a great day. Thanks for watching, everyone.